but I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Sam to present on her first 90 days. Sam is a multi-time chief of staff, so she has gone through this onboarding a couple of times, and so I asked her to meticulously document this last time that she's become a chief of staff so that we can share with our aspiring chiefs of staff, our new incoming chiefs of staff, some blueprints and templates and timelines so that even if you haven't done all this yet, it's not too late. You can definitely go back and make sure you're filling out some of this. And if you haven't become a chief of staff yet, you can use this as something to look forward. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Sam. Thank you so much for joining us today, and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to drop my slide deck in the chat just so that everybody can see it. It is super high level. Like Clara said, I've done this a couple times, and I realized as I was documenting it, I was like, there's so many common themes. So just a high level, and then I'm happy to share any more blueprints after the call, either on Slack or email, whatever. But just as a high level, kind of where I kind of went with this. Um, and I, Clara, how do we have it? Is it like, can people unmute and ask questions along the way? Or what? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Um, so I can present, I think. Yeah, cool. So like I said, the first 30 days, or 30, 60, 90 days, I'm just about at 90 days with Arch. So what I was walking into through Arch is I was joining a team who they were super honest and upfront about what the role or how they got to the place of the role of chief of staff from the beginning. So they were eliminating a couple of roles to bring on a couple of niche roles, head of operations and a senior talent partner to be super specific, to bring in more of a generalist. They were also going through a product pivot, meaning starting from ground zero and starting something new, changing the name. And in the first interaction with the CEO, he was like, yeah, so I'd never really heard of a chief of staff until about a month ago. So that was like the context that I was given. And going through this first 30, 60, 90 days, boiling everything down to themes, like I mentioned. So just to give a high level, and then I'll go through each of the 30 days, or each section of the 30 days. So the first 30 days was really about like curiosity, awareness, and osmosis. I think these themes carry out through indefinitely, but my first 30 days was I was super fortunate that the individuals that their roles were kind of being eliminated were still on board when I was there. And I've never seen people handle something like this so graciously. So I was just really curious on kind of how the business was running, what their roles were, where they were maybe too niche for what the business needed now, so that I could understand like why the generalist needed to come in, and kind of absorb certain things, an awareness of how the business was running. Not only did the first product that Arch, formerly a different company, uh, wasn't super successful, but there was also some kind of holes in how the business was running, because people didn't know what was going on. So that awareness of what the company was doing and how it was running, and then osmosis, which is one of my favorite things. So just like picking up every single thing that you can from every single individual within the company or externally related to the company, I think is something that is a huge theme for chiefs of staffs. Especially during the onboarding process, is everyone that you interact with has the ability to give a tidbit of information or insight into the company that you're now working with, so that you can ultimately become more efficient in your role, and then therefore making the company more efficient, which is really the big underlying goal for Arch, as bringing on a chief of staff, is like, how do we make everybody more efficient in the role that they're in? And their answer was to kind of bring a generalist on. So as those first 30 days, kind of the second 30 days or the 60 days in, it was really having this ownership of these areas of opportunity that we've all identified in the first 30 days, or they had identified prior to bringing me on, and implementing certain things. There's really low hanging fruit. I think a lot of you have probably experienced that in your roles of coming in, and we're all very efficient. As Clara mentioned, we all showed up very prompt on time today. So being able to just jump in and implement certain things really quickly shows how efficient a chief of staff can be, and gives a lot of reassurance, especially to the principals that I'm working with. So it's a CEO and a CPO, two co-founders. Um, just this confidence and rapport building through implementation, and certain things seem pretty small, or very normal to me, and I would assume to a lot of you, but for them, it was like night and day. So that was great. And then planning. I think in startup world, so I'm at a seed stage company. So there's 12 of us, 10 of us, depending on 10 of us officially, and we have a couple full-time contractors. But it's really easy to think about what's going on today and kind of forget about the big picture. How do we get to the big picture? I think everybody knows the big picture within the company, go public, and have this amazing company. But the planning from where we are today and where we're going, and how every decision that we're making has an impact on today and the future, I think is a really big thing that I have found that I focused on time and time again, stepping into this role. And then the 90 days, which I'm kind of bumping up to that right now. A lot of what we've been doing is kind of forward thinking again with the planning of, okay, what processes and policies and things that we've implemented in the first 60 days are working for us today. How do we make sure they're good building bones or building blocks for the future? And then the realignment, like I mentioned, we went through a product change, a product shift, a whole new company name. So checking in with the principals and the rest of the team of like, are we still aligned on the priorities of this generalist, the chief of staff role, and then fine tuning. I think that's always something that should be a forefront for kind of onboarding and continuing on as a chief of staff. And something that I've found super successful is, having the confidence and ownership in certain things, but then always fine tuning it. Different seasons of businesses need different kind of processes and policies, and different principles, or even with different teams. I think that's one of the things that we all love about the chief of staff is we get to interact with everybody. But that may take different fine tuning along the way. I can't see the chat or anything. Is there anything that I can touch on before I dive into a little bit more of each of the 30, 60, 90, or are we good to keep going on?
There's a question here that just popped up by
Yeah.
Trisha. I'm happy to do this if you want to pause and I can read the questions for you. So Trisha
Yeah.
asks, when you sought information by osmosis, did you seek this formally, such as asking a team member out to lunch, or completely informally? I wonder what your thoughts are, because some may find a formal approach as threatening, question mark.
Yeah, that's a super good question. So Arch is 100% remote. We are remote and global. So we are in 6 different time zones in 7 different countries. So one of the things that I've found so successful is to kind of remove the barrier of formality. I did this at Accrue and Raydiant previously as well, of just like, hey, let's have a coffee chat. Whether it's virtual or in person, of just like understanding where everybody is in the company and getting a sense of how they approach things, as well as their understanding of what a chief of staff is. I remember in one of my coffee chats at Arch, someone was like, oh, so you're like a Swiss Army knife. And I was like, yeah, exactly it. So having that approach initially kind of being a little informal, I think is super helpful, and does kind of eliminate that potential for being abrasive or anything like that, where and then I think from that initial conversation, if you have anything that you want to dive into further, it can be a more formal conversation then of like, area of opportunity, like, oh, we talked about this and I'd love to understand, like, in a more formal way how to do this. But I think approaching it with a general curiosity and like a kindness approach, I've never had any pushback on that type of um, feeling like osmosis wasn't anything but a place of like, how do we make the team more efficient? But I think leading with more of a casual, informal approach works super well too, and then focusing more on the bullet points of anything that you need more formally. So the first 30 days, these were kind of the questions. The first question was just like, how is the business running? And that was like my focus area of this osmosis. And um, in those coffee chats, those informal coffee chats, like, how do you think the business is going? Like, what does the business do? Let's start there. So just to get a really good understanding of where everybody is visualizing and seeing the company and also feeling about the company. I think one of my approaches as a chief of staff is to kind of be that glue. And I think a lot of people too, I know it varies a little bit from company to company and size and things like that, but being that glue in those, especially in a startup, kind of the middleman between or middle person between the founders and CEOs, CPO, whatever leadership team and the rest of the team. So just really approaching of like, how is the business running? Because if the CEO and CPO are saying one thing and our engineers are saying another thing, like that's a trigger to me, or an area of opportunity of like, okay, we need to all get on the same page. So the first 30 days was a lot of how is the business running. I did spend a lot of time with that senior talent partner and head of operations, diving more into the specifics of like, okay, how are you doing X, Y, and Z, and like really getting tactical about it. And again, focusing on absorbing any and all information. I met with both our CEO and CPO have professional development coaches. I met with both of them in my first 30 days just to kind of understand some of the feedback that they had gotten in their 360 reviews that I wasn't there for. And um, I think being super curious about what's going on, you can always find information from anybody. Reading LinkedIn or reading the company previously was open source. So Reddit posts, GitHub, repositories and stuff like that. Just finding information on truly the company that you're joining and how it's being run, where the areas of opportunity are, and what's going really well was like main focus for those first 30 days. I think it's important. It's not a bullet point on this slide, but under areas of opportunity, I think it's really important to note that keeping track of things that are working super well and that are super positive is also really important. Um, and then what I was able to give kind of in those first 30 days is sharing the opportunity of a chief of staff, or the team likes to refer to it as the Swiss Army knife. Within those first 30 days, especially in this situation, right? Like the team was very honest and open of like, hey, we're removing two roles and we're bringing in one person. And that I was nervous about that at first. And like, how does that all land with everybody? What is the communication around that? And so my first 30 days was, aside from absorbing a ton of information, was being able to share the opportunity that a chief of staff could bring to the team. And that was a lot of coffee chats, especially with the team that I won't work as directly with. So, mostly our engineers, and then with the founders who had one of our investors was like, you really need a chief of staff. And they're like, okay, great. And that was kind of how they started down this path of getting a chief of staff. So really sharing the opportunity with them of what a chief of staff looks like was really the first 30 days. So it was a lot of conversations internally and just a lot of my own research and reading and finding information. Anything there, or shall we keep going? Cool. I'm going to keep going. So in the second 30 days, or kind of day 1 to 60, it was a lot of solidifying those areas of ownership for the chief of staff. Um, the the first 30 days was, observing information and kind of sharing that opportunity. And then that second 30 days is really like, okay, we've defined the role of chief of staff and how the chief of staff can work here at Arch. So it was a lot of reinforcing at Arch that the head of operations and the senior talent partner, they were kind of removed, and the chief of staff was born for the team. And we also implemented that ownership. So for our team, it looked like we used GitHub for all of our organization, of all of these tasks going on, and it was, sharing that. I don't think GitHub is necessarily what everybody should use, but I do think something that I found a lot of success, and it was really evident here at Arch, was having a space where somebody could come and dump a thought on, in a generalized space, a thought, a question, anything that they want to, for the chief of staff, and having that trust and reinforcing of like, hey, I don't have this answer, but it is my job to go find that answer for you so you can stay focused on coding or building out our website or whatever it is. Implementation of that ownership was so important, and I think setting it up early was really successful. I think one thing, I would have done it even earlier, or I would encourage to do it even before the 60 days if that opportunity arises. An example would be if a company had never had a chief of staff, but also didn't have anybody in these kind of generalist roles. I think sometimes, especially at the earlier stage, it's the founder decides they no longer want to take care of a lot of these generalist things, so they bring on a chief of staff. So if there's an opportunity to earlier set up, like if you have something for the chief of staff, or it might be the chief of staff, put it here. So implementing that ownership of a place that is one generalized location. For us, it's GitHub, but I think it's really, really normal, especially because working with multiple different departments, is it's like some people Slack you, some people email you, some people, put a comment here. So kind of honing in on what that ownership is, of like, how do we communicate and how do we continue to move things forward, is super, super important. And like I said, I would highly encourage anybody to do that as soon as possible. Because what I found happening is we implemented this. I don't remember the exact date, but I had to spend time going back and searching through all of the Slacks and the emails and the voice memos and text and whatever it was to kind of catch us up. And then the other big thing is kind of begin building or updating systems. I think this is a little more relevant with this experience because we were going through a company change, name change, product change. So there was kind of a bankruptcy of all policies and systems that they had been operating on. And there was a lot of meetings of, this works, this doesn't work. And then it was like, okay, we have clarity, and what do we do with it now? So that was a big thing that I took on. In the same token, I think a really good opportunity for any chief of staff is, again, going back to that curiosity, is being curious about certain systems and kind of pulse checking. Are these systems the best systems? I think sometimes systems stay in place because it's comfortable and it's easy, but it might not be the most efficient. So I would really encourage a lot of pulse checking on the systems, um, just to make sure that it is the best possible system that's in place. So that, I would say, the second 30 days, or day 31 to 60, was a lot of tactical work of, you know, encouraging people to follow a new system of how do we communicate with the chief of staff. We understand we have a chief of staff, and what do we do? And then building and doing all this bankruptcy of policies and systems that had already been in place to make sure that they made the most sense for the company moving forward as we went through kind of the name change and new product. Anything there? Are we good? Good to keep going to 90 plus or 61 to 90, I guess it is. All right. So, like I said, this is kind of where we are now. I haven't officially, I think actually Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving is my 90 day on the mark spot. So, um, we when the new company launched, so that it was new company, new product, new goals. There was a big kind of moratorium, if you will, on the chief of staff role as far as we looked at our GitHub board, and we're like, okay, are these things relevant? Because what we talked about on day 60 or day 45, whatever it was, of kind of that ownership may not be relevant anymore. And then again, that consistent implementation of the needs of the business and the big focus with this, and we had a kind of a true north conversation as the team likes to call it, where I am today is everybody should be focusing on their niche area, and my niche area as the chief of staff is kind of everything that isn't somebody else's niche area. And um, that's kind of the question that we always ask ourselves is if I'm doing it, is it truly something that only I can do? I ask the CEO this question all the time of like, are you really the only one that can do this? Because if you are, then great, let's prioritize that because that's propelling our business forward. If you're not, then let's get it on the board and let's, implement someone else doing it. I will find the path forward for that. And really kind of being super consistent in that kind of trajectory and that kind of constant conversation with the team really has been so important for this specific team. But I think it just builds more rapport and builds more trust, especially again. And we were starting from kind of zero experience with the chief of staff or even a generalist. So I think super consistent implementation has been one of the most successful things that we've done. And then I think overall communication, communication, communication. Like I mentioned, we are completely remote and across a bunch of different time zones. So just over communication, especially through all this change and all this kind of inconsistency, being the one that is consistently communicating and communicating things that can be consistent, reiterating those has been really, really important. There is, I think, no shortage of communication, especially low-hanging fruit. Being an async remote environment, you can do a lot of, slacking or we use GitHub, like I've mentioned a couple of times. So there's a lot of comments and stuff like that just to give everybody visibility. And as well as with other people that are involved in the company, communication externally, internally, it's also important. So the theme that I've been kind of following for, day 61 and on is like, communicate everything and make sure that everybody has a lot of clarity in this time of ambiguity, just with the new company and the new product, and the new goals that are going on. So what that was a super quick high level, but what else can I answer or what questions um, people have? Clara, anything that you can think that I should touch on? I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see everybody.
I mean, I would love to open up the floor for questions. So feel free to use the raise hand button, or the raise hand function, I guess, or feel free to drop it in the chat if you can't come off mute and I'll read the question. I guess maybe the question for you, Sam, would be, can you tell us a little bit about building that relationship with your CEO, considering, they hadn't had a chief of staff before, they didn't really know what the role was even. How did you go about, getting aligned on the same page so that you were able to be the person to go around and talk to everybody else, and establish that relationship?
Yeah, for sure. So I remember my first interview with him. It was a super informal phone call, and I was really glad to hear, like, he was like, "Oh, we want to do this chief of staff thing." And I was like, "Cool. What do you mean by this chief of staff thing? Like, can you kind of just define it for me and like give me an understanding of what you think a chief of staff is?" And then like, does that actually align with what the business needs? So it was a really informal conversation with us. And we both approached it of like, let's just have a chat of, does our personality get along? Can we kind of just have a conversation? And I don't even think, other than that first question, we didn't even talk about the company or the role. It was just, do we get along? And then from there, kind of, more formal interviews and conversations. We had a lot of conversations around like, what are the tactical things of like, the CEO's name is Dawa. So one of my favorite conversations is like, Dawa, if you could remove three things from your to-do list today, like what would we be removing? And I think that's a really good indication of how he was perceiving like what a chief of staff could do for him, and the type of chief of staff that he was looking for, which allowed me to have a better understanding of like, does what I do and like, kind of who I am align with what he's looking for. We were super, super fortunate that it did align. And even as we've gone through, one of the more recent ones of like learning how we build this report together is HubSpot. So he's leading up all of the sales right now. We're using HubSpot as our CRM. Um, we have the stages. So like I was moving something from one stage to the next stage, and he was like, "Hey, did you do that?" And I was like, "Yes." And I'm guessing because I did that, it's not what you had envisioned. So it was just kind of like a very, very low ego environment, but like pulse check of like, oh, asking these questions now, like you're asking me this because it's not something that you would have done, but what would you have done? So I have that full understanding. I think having a low ego and being very fortunate that he also has a low ego has been really helpful to have those pulse check questions of just, um, having an understanding of like what the expectation is, and then owning if there's a miss in the future, of like, he very much approaches his chief of staff as his partner, so it's never been like, why did you do this? But I think having those low ego conversations from the beginning and being curious, again, being super curious from the beginning of like, Dawa, why do you list it like this? Like, help me understand why you're doing that, because he could be looking at it from a completely different perspective than I am. Does that kind of answer question there? Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like, there's a low ego culture around your community or your company already, which then makes it easy to, know that these questions are coming from a place of understanding and not, criticism or conflict. Okay,
Yep,
so we have some
totally.
questions that are popping up in the chat here. So Victoria asks, thanks for sharing these insights, Sam. How do you think about scheduling recurring calls with staff? I'm in a 50-person org, and ideally I would meet with every person at least once a quarter, but it's easy for my calendar to get cluttered.
hmm That's a really good question. 50 people, that's awesome. So when I have chief of staff office hours, and where I am now, we have multiple different time zones. So I have them every week, and they're open if people want to pop on or schedule a specific time in there. That has worked super well for me, and it's a recurring block. If nobody has RSVP'd, I, have a note for internal people like, hey, if nobody's RSVP'd to this, like I may schedule over it. But I think having that space for people and setting that expectation of like, hey, team, like if y'all want to meet with me, I've blocked these hours out. If it doesn't work for you or whatever, like let's find a new time. I'm super open to that. I think being comfortable enough to block, I think blocking out time is a super good time, Victoria. It's a priority for us for me to continue to be that person that is connecting. And it sounds like if you're hoping to meet with everybody every quarter, it's a priority for you too. So I would say just prioritize that time, or maybe make it a week or, over 2 weeks every quarter that you do this and kind of work with the team on connecting that way. I think Calendly is a super useful tool. We use that a lot internally as well, of like, here it is, throw time on our calendars for full visibility. But I think prioritizing and just being kind of protective of your time so that you can meet with team members um, is like the easiest way to do it. Are you having, is it a pain point right now, Victoria? I don't know where you are, but oh, there you are. I was
Yeah,
trying to find
very
you.
here somewhere, I'm sure. Um, yeah, the pain point is really just making sure that I have enough time, a heads down time, because it's already getting pretty busy with my specific projects. So also trying to balance out my own personal priority of meeting with everyone. I really like that office hour idea. I'm curious how you operationalize that. Like, is that just a recurring meeting that you send out to everybody's calendar and people just say yes going? And how does that change from week to week?
Yeah. So we have a team calendar. So I put it on the team calendar. That way everybody is automatically added to it. And then I block my personal calendar during that time. And I have an agenda of like, oh, this is what we talked about last time here. If anybody wants to, double click on anything. I always have like upcoming events, closures or anything like that, kind of basic information that I would share. And then the event itself is modifiable. So if anybody wants to add something to the agenda, they totally can. I have set kind of in the meeting agenda, and I'm happy to send this after the fact of like how you can see what I set up. So it's like, if you're coming, please RSVP yes. If you're unsure, maybe works great. Or no, like I've given guidelines of like how to make it efficient. But we usually start with just like a quick 5 minute like social chat, and then kind of go into like announcements and then any topics of concern or anything like that. And I've asked if somebody wants to connect during that time individually, that we do it either right at the beginning or right at the end, instead of like in the middle of that office hours. The other thing that I really like about it is if nobody comes, that time's already blocked on my calendar. So it's dedicated deep work time for me. So I've been able to kind of use those jointly with that. But I think managing the expectations with the team of like, hey, I want to be accessible. I want to connect with all of you. Here's how we do it efficiently. My team has been super receptive to that and it's worked really well. And sometimes nobody has anything that they want to talk about, so I just use it as deep work time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Trisha. So everyone understood the chief of staff role and was on the same page, establishing consistency. Did you ever give a presentation on the chief of staff role to the 12? I didn't. I wish I would have. I think that is hindsight is 2020. I think it's a super interesting thing, and I think it would have been so helpful. Um, I think I was able to accomplish that through all these coffee chats, but I think it would have been more efficient if I would have done kind of the what is the chief of staff to the whole team. I think prior to that, I would have, solidified everything with the two founders and then gone to the team and shared that. We were fortunate enough that within my first 90 days, we also had an on-site. So I did get to meet everybody in person. And so it came up informally, but I think having that as like a quick FYI, here's the chief of staff role would have been so helpful, even more helpful than these coffee chats establishing. And then brought everybody together because certain questions, may have been asked one time and another person may have had that same question but didn't ask it until they realized that it was a general thing. So, Trisha, if you are in that situation, I would highly recommend it. I think if I ever go through this again, there will be a slide deck of like, what is a chief of staff? I actually think there is one floating around in this community somewhere, I think, right, Clara? That you could easily iterate on for this specific role and like who you specifically are. So, um,
Yeah, I think so. I'll look around for it. We have a couple
Yeah.
folks who have their hands raised, so I'd love to get them off of
Yeah.
mute. Trent, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So mine is like similar to the calendar question, but more about like managing your principal's calendar. So, my principal really wants to make sure that like the chief of staff is like seen as like a strategic thought partner for most of the organization. But I also think that there is a component of like managing her time that should be a part of my job. And she like pushes back on it quite a bit, and like doesn't want me to touch her calendar. But I
Mm.
also think that like I like there's so much that like we need to talk about in the first like 90 days, and we don't have much time to do that. And have ended up having like 3 hour long conversations like past 5 p.m. just to like get all of the information out there. And so I'm curious like how much of that you do with your principals, and like how you got them to like switch over that responsibility, because if they didn't have a chief of staff before, it makes sense that they would not know about that part.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And I think something that probably a lot of chief of staffs deal with and resonate with. So I have full access to both of the co-founders' calendars and email inboxes. And really, the approach that I went with is one, is this something that only you can do, Dawa? Is like, if nobody else can do it, then Dawa needs to do it. If somebody else can do it, let's like, let me help you do that. And I think we do a lot of ghostwriting to kind of eliminate, especially externally. There's been a huge shift in kind of the perception of chief of staff, I think recently and more. But externally, we do a lot of ghostwriting. And that could really be like, oh, my chief of staff is going to take this meeting because they can handle it. Or, they're actually the point person on our CRM. I'm the one that's writing that email, and then I just copy myself and, away we go. Um, Internally, I think it's, there's no reason that you can't be a strategic partner and still handle calendaring and kind of be the floodgate to your CEOs or, your kind of principals calendar and time. And a lot of times people will start to learn that you're actually the more efficient person with some of these things that are going on, and not because your principal isn't efficient, but they just have so many things going on that they'll just, with time and a little bit of training of like, oh, like what is the actual ask for time on this person's calendar, like I can help you with that, we can do this together. And showing up that way. But I think for the CEO, it was the shift for him of like, hey, if you're truly the only one that can take this call, then awesome, but you don't know how to put a Zoom link in your meetings right now. So you don't do that, then the people are upset, and then you're pinging me and pulling me off of things. So let's just eliminate that from you until further notice, kind of a thing. Like I went to a very, very simple idea, but having those just honest conversations and making sure you don't perceive yourself as the non-strategic partner by doing, because it sounds like there's some protection from your principal of like not wanting you to feel that way. And it's just like, hey, actually you're making my job harder by not letting me do this. And Dawa and I can have that kind of straight up conversation. Does that kind of help there?
Yeah, I would want to know like when you had that conversation, because I feel like I had it with her like on the first, like on our very first meeting, and she was
Hmm.
like maybe in the future. And so I was like, okay, so like when is the future? When do I bring that up again? And like, yeah.
Yeah, so we had that conversation pretty much day one as well.
Mhm.
And there was some pulse checking going on of like, hey, I saw that you scheduled this meeting at midnight your time last night. Was it really urgent, or is that second nature, or where are we? Because I thought we were aligned that like I'm going to take care of this for you. And so pulse checking him, it was retraining him too of like he doesn't have to do this because that's not what makes him most efficient. And there have been certain times where he still wants to hold on to things. And it's again, those pulse check conversations of like, oh, why, like, help me understand the process of like why you want to do this one thing right now. I would keep track of those things and in one-on-ones be like, okay, a month ago you still wanted to own this. I feel like we're in a different place now. How is that sitting with you? Like, bring to the table that you are that strategic partner and that you're keeping track of it rather than waiting for them to bring it back up, would be my advice on that one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, Samantha. Thank you so much for just sharing your experiences and your insights. It's so helpful. My question is, could you elaborate a little bit on the time management that you had sort of implemented for yourself during the first 30 to 60 days? Because you shared that as you were coming into ARC, a lot of roles were being dissolved. And I'm sure as, as a generalist role, there is a sort of expectation to be able to kind of pick up on that slack. And I'm not sure if you had that expectation sort of placed on you, but I'd love to just hear a little bit more about how you navigated that transition without preventing any overloading on yourself, and then maintaining that focus of absorbing and gradually assimilating to ARC.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the first questions that I asked is like, okay, we're eliminating two roles and bringing one person on. If nobody gives any information to me, what are the things that like have to get done, or the company, like something bad is going to, payroll is a super good example of that. Like payroll has to run, or the company thing, dramatic things are happening at the company. So learning those things, those kind of, I use like P1, P2, P3 for my prioritization. Those became P1s for me, and I immediately put those on my calendar. I live and breathe by my calendar. My day is like, there's always blocks on my calendar of exactly what I'm going to be doing. It doesn't always happen that way, but to help me kind of process, that's a big thing. And P1, that always happens in the beginning of the day, for me. And then kind of meetings with people, or kind of those coffee chats, working with directly with people, those became priority too. And then any kind of my own research, my own information absorption was kind of P3, where that could happen during business hours, or if it was a chill night at my house and I didn't have a lot going on, like it was okay if that happened then. And if I didn't go read all of the Reddit threads about the company, I could still do the job, helpful information, but not critical to the job. So I would suggest physically blocking time on calendars. Again, as an all remote team, we all live by our calendars, and it's a great way to communicate asynchronously with each other of like what we're working on, and managing those expectations. Like, hey team, if I have on my calendar P1, whatever it is, that's something that is like, it has to get done. And unless there's another P1 that's more critical than this, like, schedule some time, after, or ping me and say you want to work on it. We use Slack. So Slack notifications and Slack, the word is escaping me right now, statuses. That's another big one. Like, I'm heads down working on this. We'll get back to your Slacks in 2 hours. That was really helpful. But I think the biggest thing for me in managing was getting everything that everybody expected, and then aligning like what ones are P1, P2, P3, and then filling them in my calendar that way. And I actually do block my calendar out like hour by hour, including time for myself, brain breaks, the dog needs a walk, I can't look at Slack anymore. Like, that is right on my calendar, full visibility, in that sense. So I would recommend giving visibility and prioritizing with your principle of like what is critical.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see.
Okay, I'm gonna go back and ask some questions that I know we're getting good in the chat here, but I'll read them for you.
Yeah.
Nancy asked, at what stage or company size do you think it's right to start hosting regular all hands calls?
Good question. I think at least, so we're 10 and we call them town halls once a quarter. More recently with just more more company-wide updates. We've had smaller town halls, if you will. But I think once a quarter, no matter the company size, is at least what should be happening just to give visibility on the health of the company. We have a board meeting once a quarter, so it's very natural for us to kind of share what's going on uh, with the company, with the team, at a much higher level once a quarter. But I think all stages of companies should be having regular what's going on in the company. And then I think, again, we utilize Slack. So we have an announcement channel that is strictly just company announcements. So more recently, we've used that. And if one thing that we've kind of agreed on as a leadership team is if there starts to be a ton of threading and questions, it's a gut check for us of like, oh, let's just create a more ad hoc company meeting, which is easier when we're a company of 10 versus a much larger company. But I think all companies should be doing it. And I think at least once a quarter makes a lot of sense, especially in startup worlds. Board meetings happen generally on the quarter. So that is a good time. A lot of the work is being done, if you will, during that time.
Yeah, I think short answer for all these questions are probably it depends. But thank you for sharing your specific. I think that's really helpful to know,
Yeah.
stage of company that you're currently at. Angie asked, and I know we talked a little bit about this, but maybe we can kind of dig into it a little bit more. Angie asked,
Yep.
given the generalist nature of the role, how do you manage your time efficiently?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think something that I definitely struggle with, and I'm sure almost all chief of staffs probably struggle with. Um, the the biggest thing that I can say is managing expectations from the beginning. Oh, it looks like, did I freeze or am I good?
You're
Am I
good.
okay? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Um, it looked like it froze there for a second. So I think managing expectations from the beginning with my principal, we had, again, super honest and open conversation. For him, because I do calendar or inbox management for him, and our agreement was like anything that Dawa isn't the only one that can do, it doesn't even come into his inbox so that he can only focus on things that are for him. But with that, to be efficient, we agreed that like I would be online before him. And then I said, okay, that's totally great. But here, I need these things in my personal life. The gym is super important to me and I like to work out in the morning. So we agree on that. And then I log off for 2 hours in the morning after I take care of his inbox to go address my needs and kind of what I'm looking for. So I think honest conversations with especially your principal from the beginning of expectations, like what do they expect from you and what do you like how does that align with who you are and how I don't believe in work-life balance. I really believe in like work-life integration, how that works. And then the biggest way that I manage my time is my calendar. It is from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. There is a block on there every single day at every single time. Some of those blocks are free and it'll literally say free work or open work, catch up work. So it's not to say that you can't get time on my calendar, but it just does give people visibility of what's going on. And for me too, I put GitHub on there. That's where we manage priorities and tasks. So I will put 30 minutes of like GitHub prioritization and making sure I know what's being asked of me. And again, I also put on there, I'm taking my dog for a walk right now. And just having that visibility. But the calendar is the biggest way to manage my time efficiently. Uh, of course, you think you have a plan one day and then the day actually happens and that actually isn't the plan. Um, so I think just having the flexibility of like, okay, this is the ideal and this is how I feel like I'm showing up in a calm work environment, but things change all the time and I can move stuff around that. But I think the calendar for me is the most efficient and effective way for myself and also communication to the rest of the team.
Yeah, I love that idea of creating kind of almost like your optimal schedule, right? And you time block everything so that it's repeatable. I mean, even for myself, um, that was something I had to learn on the job. And now I just, standing lunch break, like if something urgent
Yep.
happens, sure, that gets scheduled over. But, even just blocking no meeting times on your calendar. And I think that is totally okay to take control of your own schedule. Even if you're a chief of staff and you're supporting a principal, it doesn't mean that your time is just suddenly free for all for everyone else. I think,
Hmm.
Victoria mentioned having deep work time, right? Like that's legitimate time that you need to spend. So, don't forget to
Totally.
schedule that for yourself
Yeah.
as um
Yeah, and I think just the communicate, right? Like I'll get Slacks down. It's like, oh, I know you're walking Kaya, who is my dog. When you get back, and I haven't. It's just because they looked at my calendar and they have that visibility. And again, they feel like they're being heard and understood and all of those things. But at the same time, they're acknowledging that, hey, I don't expect an immediate response like this. Or it could be the same thing of like, hey, Sam, I know you're walking Kaya right now, but like P1. But I'll put that in my calendar box too, like walking Kaya, not taking my phone, or walking Kaya, general Slacks, good. But yeah, I think it's super helpful.
Drew is asking, I would think it's quite scary to go into a role where you're replacing two people who were transitioned off. How did you feel safe and trust the CEO versus choosing a different opportunity?
Yeah, super good question, Drew. Something that the CEO, Dawa, and I spent a lot of time on. It was one, I give them so much credit from the get-go. They did not hide anything from me. Um, they weren't secretive about anything that was going on. It was very clear from, I think, conversation two, because like I said, conversation one was really just like, can we get along and have a chit chat? Conversation two, it was a very honest conversation, which immediately made me feel this safety of like, okay, I feel like he has made the best decision for the business in going down this path. I also had the opportunity to talk to both of the individuals that were kind of transitioning off. Um, and I don't know how they got to this place, but the place that they were when we had the conversation was they were super supportive of it. And they agreed of like what Dawa was looking for in a chief of staff. It didn't align with them personally and what they wanted to do, nor is it something that they were good at. So I think I that's actually a really good question. I could actually ask him of like, how did you set this up for success? But what I walked into, I felt very set up for success. In the visibility into what was going on, the opportunity to talk to these individuals before I accepted a position, as well as they were very convinced. Like it wasn't just Dawa telling me like, oh yeah, they'll be here when you're onboarding. Like they were telling me that they would be here while they were onboarding, and they super supportive of the company and where the company was going, but what the specific needs of the company no longer aligned with what it was relevant for them or what they wanted to be working on, or was it anything that they had experience with. They're both very, very niche and very good at what they did. So um, how did I feel safe? I think I was super fortunate to have a team that was very honest and open from upfront, which allowed me to ask questions if I had any, and make sure that I was able to continue to feel safe. But yeah, that's probably not like a super great answer, other than they did a really good job of setting me up from the beginning with their honesty and whatever work they put in before the interview process started was nothing but like, we support this, we want this to happen because we think it's a great company. So yeah, I felt safe from the beginning with that, but I think the honesty was the biggest piece.
That's amazing. I think it's so principle dependent, right? If you had felt differently and you felt like Dabo was being cagey or, unwilling to give you enough information, then you might have chosen a different path. But it sounds like there was a great two-way communication there. So that brings us to the top of the hour. I know we have some other questions, but Sam is in our Slack. So, feel free to, we'll do a follow-up thread about this event in particular. And if you have questions, feel free to drop them there. And if Sam has the time, then we can answer a couple more of those. But everyone, huge round of applause for Sam. Thank you so much for sharing your first 30, 60, 90 days with us. We so appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the week. So we'll chat soon. Bye, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.